Jin-Woo was super tired, and really wanted to rest and recover some of his HP, but he knew monsters would show up if they caught him sleeping. That would only make things worse, especially since he was already feeling pretty fatigued. He glanced at his stats, HP 45 ding 1 in 30 30 MP, 660 Sazadai 90. Fatigue, 43s. Alright, let's finish this, Jin-Woo said to himself. He tightened his grip on the heavy door handles of both gates. With a loud creak, the massive doors swung open, as if they were triggered by some hidden mechanism. A boom, the doors to the boss's lair burst open, revealing what lay inside. The room was so dark, it felt like a thick blanket had swallowed all the light. Jin-Woo's super sharp vision helped him see a bit better, but even then, the shadows made everything fuzzy beyond a few feet. The ground beneath his feet was covered in flat gray stones, arranged neatly like pieces of a giant jigsaw puzzle. Each slab fit perfectly with the next, giving the space an icy chill that had nothing to do with the actual temperature. Whoa! As soon as Jin-Woo stepped on one, whoosh, torch after torch on the walls lit up at once, brightening the whole area, just like I thought. It was just like what happened in that underground temple. Jin-Woo stayed sharp, moving cautiously forward to check out the room. Huge pillars stood on both sides, and way at the end of the room sat a massive throne. It's just like a king's throne from a movie or something, but way, way bigger. As Jin-Woo walked deeper into the room, the doors slammed shut with a loud slam. He glanced back over his shoulder, but he wasn't surprised. It's exactly what he had been expecting to happen. He kept moving forward, but something felt off. A voice in his head screamed that he had to reach the throne to finish the job. His instincts were almost never wrong in moments like this. Just as he was about to get there, a shadowy figure popped out from behind a pillar 10 steps away, and blocked his path. Thump, thump, thump. Thud. First the creature stopped and turned to face Jin-Woo. Jin-Woo froze, his heart racing. He gulped hard, swallowing the knot in his throat. When Jin-Woo saw the bright red name floating above the knight's helmet, he knew right away he was face to face with the boss. Knight Commander Igris the Bloodred. This wasn't just any ordinary knight. This one was decked out in a full suit of crimson armor that gleamed dangerously under the light. While the other knights Jin-Woo had faced were basically brainless drones, Igris looked way more alert and sharp. His stance alone made it clear, this guy was here to put up a serious fight. Every inch of him screamed, "I'm the boss, and don't you forget it." Jin-Woo's eyes landed on something really cool. The helmet. It had a long red mane that looked like a fiery horse's mane, running from the top down the back. As he took a closer look, Jin-Woo noticed something else strange. Were those eyes? He wasn't totally sure if they were actual eyes, or just pupils, but one thing was clear. Where the eyes should be, there were dim silver lights glowing softly. Jin-Woo could tell something was off about this knight. It seemed cold and almost mechanical, like a machine rather than a living being. Its icy stare locked onto Jin-Woo, sending chills down his spine. He remembered that strange presence he'd felt before. Could this be the same thing? If defeating this knight was part of his job change quest, he needed to be extra careful. Clenching his fists, Jin-Woo got into a fighting stance, keeping a close eye on Igris's every move. His dagger probably wouldn't do much against armor like this. He really needed something heavier, like a hammer or mace, to make an impact. Just then Igris did something unexpected. Swept off its cloak in one swift motion. The cloak hit the floor with a soft thud. Jin-Woo wondered, what is it doing? And that was only the beginning of the weirdness. Igris pulled off its sword from its waist, and 2 daggers from behind its back, holding each weapon up for a moment before letting them fall to the ground. It almost seemed like Igris wanted Jin-Woo to notice what was happening. Clatter, clang. The sharp sounds of metal hitting stone filled the huge underground lair. Igris tossed its weapons aside and raised its fists, ready to fight. Jin-Woo stared in shock. Was Igris really planning to fight him bare-fisted just because Jin-Woo was? Jin-Woo bit down on his lip. It's mocking me. His face burned with anger at the challenge. Jin-Woo's emotions were super intense, and his heart was pounding faster than ever. His eyes were totally locked on what was coming next, as if he knew something was about to happen. Suddenly Igris, the knight, charged straight at him like it had read Jin-Woo's mind. The sound of its heavy armor echoed with each step. Thud, 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 thud. But here's the thing. Its speed was insane. Armor usually slows you down, unless your strength is off the charts. like 80 or higher. Clearly, Igris wasn't holding back. The knight moved so fast and smoothly that it seemed more like a high-ranking hunter than a clunky armored fighter. Then, in an instant, Igris sprang into the air. Thud! Its knee came flying straight at Jin-Woo's face. Whoa, that's crazy fast, Jin-Woo thought, but he didn't panic. He pushed his reflexes to max speed and got ready to dodge. He bent backward, almost folding in half to dodge the attack, then quickly popped back up. Igris landed gracefully where others had failed. Its movement smooth and calculated. Thudded. Jin-Woo barely had time to register how cool that was before he sprang into action. In a flash, Jin-Woo dashed toward Igris before it could even turn around, and a powerful kick at the monster's face. But Igris was ready, even though it was off balance. Its hand shot out with surprising skill. Bashin. The knight caught Jin-Woo's leg mid-kick. Jin-Woo's eyes widened in disbelief. No way. Igris smashed its fists at Jin-Woo's face while one of its opponent's feet was out of action. Jin-Woo quickly lifted his arms to block the hit, but it didn't help one bit. And bam! His arms flew wild as he soared through the air. Wah! Jin-Woo gasped, in shock before groaning in pain. Before he could even process what happened, Igris was already right in front of him again. Jin-Woo didn't have time to react before Igris's left fist smashed into the side of his face. Bum! Jin-Woo crashed into the ground, his body bouncing back and rolling away for a bit. It took him a moment to get back on his feet. His ears were ringing, screaming. Bum! He shook his head hard a few times, and the ringing got a little better. But that was the least of his worries. Jin-Woo's blurry vision caught sight of Igris striding toward him. Thump! Thump! He forced his eyes wide open and tensed his legs. Igris stopped right in front of him, and that's when things got really intense. Igris didn't even try to block Jin-Woo's punches. Instead, it took the hits and then struck back with lightning speed. Bam! Jin-Woo's managed to knock Igris's head slightly to one side. But before he could even pull his arm back, Igris returned the favor. Bam! Jin-Woo staggered sideways. Bam! This time Igris stumbled back a step. Bam! A punch to Jin-Woo's gut sent him doubling over. Gag! He coughed up blood. How was this happening? Jin-Woo had over 30% physical damage reduction, but every punch from Igris felt like getting slammed with a hammer. On the other hand, Jin-Woo's attacks barely did any damage at all. The fight didn't last long. Kabam! Jin-Woo's knees finally gave out. But hood. He tried to get back up, but his legs felt like jelly and wouldn't hold him. Ba-pump. Hang. He groaned. Confused. Igris stood over him, silent and intimidating. Ignoring Jin-Woo's confused expression, the knight stretched out its hand toward the sword lying across the room, and in an instant, the blade zoomed back into its grasp. The knight grabbed his sword tightly, stood next to Jin-Woo, and pointed the blade straight up at the sky. Jin-Woo figured out Igris's plan. It wanted to cut off his head. Igris was definitely acting like a true knight commander. Jin-Woo didn't move or fight back, so Igris went ahead with the execution. But of course Jin-Woo wasn't gonna let that happen without a fight. The sword came swinging down swoosh. Just as it did, Jin-Woo punched the air with his left fist. An sland echoed as metal hit metal. Jin-Woo's new gauntlets protected his hands from the blow. Igris blinked in surprise. It clearly hadn't seen that coming. Jin-Woo saw his chance and threw a solid punch with his right fist. Just as he expected, the knight didn't even try to move out of the way. The knight was clearly planning another hit in return. But there was one thing the knight hadn't seen coming. Kasaka's venom fang. In a split second, the venomous blade appeared in Jin-Woo's hand, gleaming with menace. With a swift strike he plunged it straight into the knight's eye. Shunk! Up! Blood-curdling scream ripped through the air. It wasn't human, it was something far more terrifying. At the same time, a bright light blasted out of the eye that held the dagger. Jin-Woo quickly jumped to his feet. Now what? Destroying one eye wasn't enough to end this fight. He needed something bigger. A final attack. Then a plan popped into his head. A terrifying move he had barely survived before. Jin-Woo decided it was time to give Igris a little taste of his own medicine. Before he even realized what he was doing, Jin-Woo dropped low, grabbed Igris around the waist, and took off running. Grissa! Igris roared, pounding Jin-Woo's back with his fists. Jin-Woo gritted his teeth, wincing in pain, but he didn't let go. He held on tight, determined to see this through. But Jin-Woo wasn't slowing down. He sped up. Dash! He shouted. Your speed has increased by 40%. His legs moved faster, his entire body rattling from the force. Yes, this was it. He was going to smash Igris to pieces. Gripping his opponent tightly, Jin-Woo hurtled toward the wall. The collision would hurt him too, but he had one last trick up his sleeve. In a flash they reached the wall. Buxop. Igris smashed into the stone with incredible force. The ground trembled for a second. A message popped up. Skill, willpower has been activated. Your HP is below 30%. Damage you take will be reduced by 50%. Jin-Woo stumbled back, grunting in pain. Ugh. Igris was stuck in the wall but still alive. The fire of life kept burning inside it. I need to end this. Jin-Woo grabbed Kasaka's venom fang from Igris's eye, and its body twitched. Jin-Woo gripped it tightly and swung at the knight's throat. Fatal strike. Clang. The attack bounced off. Again. Fatal strike. Clang. Sparks flew everywhere. Scratches appeared on the metal plate protecting its neck. Again. Fatal strike. Clang. Again. Clang. 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 Then finally. Fatal strike. Kasaka's venom fang sank deep into its throat. You have defeated Knight Commander Igris the Bloodred. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. Jin-Woo raised his arms in victory. He stepped back a few times before dropping to his hands and knees as his legs gave out. Huff, huff. He panted, finally letting go of the breath he'd been holding. He'd barely won. It had been super close. But the quest wasn't over yet. Jin-Woo took a moment to catch his breath, then pushed himself up. He figured defeating Igris would end the quest. But there was nothing, no message, no sign. Everything seemed exactly as it had before. Well, almost everything. Igris lay motionless, and something strange was happening. Glowing lights were rising from his body. There were items to pick up. Better grab them first. Who knew what would happen next? Jin-Woo knew grabbing anything he could, whenever he could, was his best move. He stretched out his hand, ready to grab whatever came his way. Suddenly, a message flashed in front of him. You have discovered item. Crimson Knight's helmet. Would you like to acquire it? Before he could even respond, another alert popped up. You have discovered Rune Stone Ruler's Hand. Would you like to acquire it? And then, just as quickly, you have discovered item. Leather pouch. What would you do? Would you like to grab it? Jin-Woo found himself staring at tons of items. And honestly, it was kind of confusing, but also super exciting. He couldn't resist the temptation. Take all, he decided. The first item up was a leather pouch. He opened it, and his jaw dropped. Inside was 1,500,000 gold. Jin-Woo's eyes nearly popped out of his head. These rewards were insane. The battle had been super tough, but payouts like this made every bit of it worth it. He wasn't really expecting much from the leather pouch. Definitely not a whopping 1,500,000 gold. With that kind of money he could buy all sorts of awesome stuff from the shop. But Jin-Woo's mind was already racing somewhere else. If something he didn't expect much from turned out to be this incredible, just how amazing would the helmet or runestone be? He tried to calm himself down as he checked the helmet's info. Pinning. S@I. Crimson Kun Knight's helmet acquisition difficulty. S category protective gear physical damage decrease. 15% stamina plus 20. Strength. Plus 20s, rank. Jin-Woo shouted, pumping his fist in the air. His very first S-rank item. This was a big deal. A 15% drop in physical damage would have been awesome on its own. But this was even better. It boosted his strength and stamina by 20 points each. Just seeing those numbers made his heart race. A-rank items couldn't hold a candle to this. Good my now. He'd already snagged a couple of A-rank treasures. First up was Kasaka's venom gland from that snake-like creature. The Kasaka. Then there was the Warden's collar, which he got from the Hellhound Cerberus. Both items were seriously cool in their own way. Even with the strength penalty, the venomous gland reduced physical damage by 20%. The Warden's collar was one of the coolest items out there. It boosted agility and perception by 20 points each. But then Jin-Woo found the Crimson Knight's helmet, which basically combined the best of both worlds without any downsides. It was like getting a superpower upgrade. Jin-Woo couldn't help but grin as he stood in the middle of the boss lair. The helmet wasn't just powerful, it looked amazing too. Its blood-red color and flowing mane made it look like something straight out of an epic story. Sure, it'd be invisible to everyone else, but Jin-Woo didn't care. To him it was perfect, and he felt like the luckiest guy alive to have it. For a moment he wondered what it would be like to put on the whole suit of armor. But then he remembered not every piece of Igris's armor was glowing, which meant some parts were off limits to him. The only thing he could take was the helmet. He sighed and pushed aside his daydreams, carefully placing the helmet over his head. Whoom! In an instant the helmet vanished, just like always. The helmet was seriously awesome. Even if he couldn't show it off, it gave him a major power boost. His strength shot up to 1228, with a bonus of plus 20. Stamina jumped to 87, also with a plus 20 bump. Agility stayed at 10-7, intelligence at 66, and perception at 89. The best part, physical damage was reduced by a whopping 46%, a huge improvement from before. The numbers in brackets showed how much each stat increased thanks to the helmet. His strength, stamina, and ability to take hits had all gone through the roof. He couldn't have been happier with this upgrade. He felt his heartbeat speed up as he looked at the changes in his stats. But then he stopped himself. He furrowed his brow because the quest wasn't done yet, so there was no need to celebrate too early. Plus, he still had other items to examine. His eyes moved eagerly to the other two items. Out of the two small stones, which were about the size of walnuts, the instant teleportation stone caught his eye first. He knew what a rune stone was, but he had no idea what an instant teleportation stone was. His curiosity was finally satisfied when the information screen popped up. Upside Ep. Instant teleportation stone. Upside Ek. If Jin-Woo crushed the stone, it would instantly teleport him outside the dungeon. But if he didn't use it, it would automatically disappear once the job change quest ended. And there was no way to store it in his inventory. The way it worked was similar to a runestone, but instead of teaching him a new skill, this one was for escaping the dungeon. Jin-Woo's eyes narrowed as he thought about something strange. Wait, isn't the job change quest still going on? If it had ended, the stone should have already crumbled into dust, right? But here it was, still intact in his hand. That could only mean one thing. A shiver ran down Jin-Woo's spine as he realized something unexpected. He had just gotten his hands on an amazing item that could help him escape the dungeon. But then a bad feeling hit him. If this rock could work in normal dungeons outside the system, every hunter would fight to get one. This rock was worth risking your life for. So what wouldn't someone pay for it? And Jin-Woo was no different. The stone made the quest feel a little less stressful. If Jin-Woo needed to, he could leave the dungeon whenever he wanted. But there was still that nagging feeling in the back of his mind, like something wasn't quite right. And just as he'd expected, the system suddenly blared an alarm, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Apeen. App player has acquired the instant teleportation stone. The job change quest begins now. Wait, what? Did getting this item just trigger the start of the quest? Jin-Woo felt lightheaded, like he'd accidentally stepped on a landmine. If only he'd known this would happen, he'd have taken it easier before now. But regrets were too late. No matter how experienced or smart someone was, predicting the future with certainty was impossible. Jin-Woo's palms were slick with sweat as he quickly checked his stats. His HP was at 431 out of 10. 2070, his MP was 390 out of 850, and his fatigue level was 61. Oh, right, the fatigue is a bit high, but I can manage. The helmet's stamina boost had also increased both his total and current HP, which was a relief. He took a deep breath and pumped himself up. I've got this under control. At plus, he wasn't in real danger. He held the instant teleportation stone in his hand, ready to escape if things went south. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the stone meant surrender. Why else would it start the quest? If he gave up now, he'd lose his chance to change his job. Sweat trickled down his face and dripped onto the floor. His lips felt dry, so he licked them just as a new message popped up. Cupping. App's dimensional gates will be randomly generated in 10 seconds. Dimensional gates. He wondered aloud. Instead of an answer, giant numbers appeared in the air. Absurd. Downs. It was clearly counting down. More messages flashed next. The player has a choice. The player can either leave the dungeon using the instant teleportation stone. The countdown continued. 8, 7, 6. Or survive as long as possible. Gather in advancement points to get promoted to a higher class. Survive. What are you even talking about? Jin-Woo burst out in frustration. But he was already getting ready for whatever came next. He quickly swapped the rune stone with Kasaka's venom fang and stuffed the instant teleportation stone into his back pocket. His mind was a whirlwind. But one thing was certain: he was prepared to fight. This was who he was. The timer flashed. 4, 3, Jin-Woo's eyes locked onto it, his anxiety growing with every passing second. He looked around frantically, his head darting in all directions, ready for anything that might come his way. Something was up. The air around him started acting super weird, bending and twisting like nothing he'd ever seen before. Then came a surprise thousand. Will 1. Good luck. The system actually showed some emotion for once. But there wasn't time to think about that. As the countdown reached 0, gates began popping up all over the room. Will 1. And we're not talking just 1 or 2 gates here. It was a whole bunch of them. About 6 people were nearby Jin-Woo, and even more were scattered around the room. A timer sprang to life, and every second counted. The longer he lasted, the better his reward would be. Jin-Woo wasn't totally sure how it all worked, but he caught the main idea: the longer he could endure, the stronger he'd become. And if he held on long enough, he'd land a much better job. He knew he couldn't miss this chance. With plenty of HP and MP left, he was ready for whatever came next. "I'll give it everything I've got," he shouted. The clock ticked down to just 3 seconds. Then an endless wave of weaponless knights burst out from the gates nearby. The ground shook with the force of all those silver knights charging forward, one after another. The number of knights might have been intimidating, but Jin-Woo just grinned to himself. "I can totally handle these guys." He thought. He was actually kind of relieved these knights were his opponents. If they'd been monsters as strong as a Gris, he wouldn't have lasted more than a few seconds. Time to disappear from their view. Jin-Woo decided. He used some of his precious mana to activate stealth. Jin-Woo, in an instant he started fading away. Just as expected, all the charging knights suddenly screeched to a halt. But then, something happened. The system beeped loudly, catching Jin-Woo off guard. He spun around, wondering what was going on. What the Buyua? Asmij had just popped out of a shimmering gate, and was casting some kind of spell. Above its head floated a glowing eye shape. A symbol Jin-Woo recognized all too well. As Jin-Woo moved, the symbol suddenly lit up, and his stealth ability shut off in an instant. Oh no! Things were going south fast. Philip. The knights, standing stiff like robots, all snapped their heads toward Jin-Woo at the exact same time. It was super creepy, like something out of a scary movie. A wave of silver headed his way. Jin-Woo tightened up, ready for impact. Pull. Alan. He punched one knight right in the head, and it froze in place. "You have defeated a knight." Jin-Woo's eyes lit up with excitement. Murderous intent. Alan's skill. Murderous intent has been activated. Debuff. Panic has been activated. All the opponent's abilities will decrease by 50% for 1 minute. The debuff slowed down a lot of the monsters, but Jin-Woo's MP dropped to 90. Murderous intent used up 100 mana, so Jin-Woo couldn't cast it again. But he had bought himself a minute enough time to take out as many monsters as possible while they were weak. Bam, crack, crock. Jin-Woo moved at lightning speed, smashing his enemies one after another. The sounds of battle filled the air. Bam, crack. But more knights kept pouring through the gate faster than he could defeat them. Thud, 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 thud. The ground trembled under their relentless march. In the chaos, Jin-Woo glanced at the timer. Thud, thud, thud. 3 minutes and 19 seconds left.